Welcome to this officials education session, Effective Communication in Athletics, organised by the New South Wales Joint Officials Committee and presented by Barry Pecar and John Morris. My name is Darren Wenzer. I'm the Head of Coach and Volunteer Development at Little Athletics New South Wales. Now, this session aims to discuss strategies for communicating with athletes of all ages, coaches, parents, teachers, other officials, including new officials and volunteers. Now, I'd like to acknowledge that Mary Macaluso, the Athletics New South Wales Workforce Coordinator, is with us online this evening. Daniel Warren, the Little Athletics New South Wales Volunteer Manager and Business Analyst, is an apology. But we also have members of the Joint Officials Committee, the New South Wales Joint Officials Committee online. And of course, our presenters, Barry Pecar and John Morris, both experienced officials and education course presenters, as well as being members of the Joint Officials Committee, and Barry is the chair of that committee. Now, before passing over to John and Barry, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we are all situated today. I'm here out at the Little Athletics office at Sydney Olympic Park, which is Wongal land, and I pay my respects to elders past and present and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples with us today. Now, it is now over to our two presenters, Barry and John, to deliver this presentation, and I believe John will be getting us underway. Over to you, John.
Thanks, Darren. As many of us know that in more recent years, it's social media that determines a lot of communication between people, and even tonight we're using social media to an extent to communicate our message. But I'm back on the field of play. When we're involved with athletics, it's more about face-to-face communication, and that's the really important thing that we need to be aware of. So I'm just going to start off by the importance of officials as communicators. So as started off, besides seeing that the competition is conducted in a proper manner, officials are often the first port of call for members of the athletics community. And it is important that we treat them with respect and we acknowledge their presence, because we really don't know in many ways what their backgrounds are. And hopefully during their officiating, as we're assisting them, mentoring them, coaching them, whatever way we want to say it, we need to help them as best we can. So through our actions, we should provide athletes, coaches, parents, volunteers and other officials with an enjoyable, welcoming environment, as they will want to return, because what we need to do is make sure that they're not ignored when they first arrived. And some of us, I'm sure in their past, will have understood this, because and many times I know of some people who attended the first day and they raked all day, and that was the end of we didn't see them again, or they did the one job that was fairly laborious and labour intensive, and they didn't return, and it took some years for them to come back. And so that's what we need to do, is that welcoming environment is really important. And welcoming the athletes, as I said, and officials from all the backgrounds, not just athletic backgrounds, but also ethnic backgrounds, because in different languages, we have different emphasis on different word endings and starts. And it is important that everyone feels that they're on the same level. We need to demonstrate empathy and compassion and an understanding at all competitive levels. So we're talking about the 5-year-old who might be running in their 100 metres race or their 50 metres race, right up to the, like someone like yesterday who was at the World Cross Country selection trials. They're fairly nervous as well at that stage. We need to show empathy to those to make them feel comfortable and provide appropriate advice as required. And again, that's the important thing too. Don't leave them. Make sure that you talk to them so they feel comfortable and they feel you set up a welcoming and supportive environment where they can ask questions without fear. So what do we look for when we're dealing with new technical officials and volunteers? This is what we need to be doing. We need to be actively attracting these people to come along and to assist us, because many of us know, especially people in my age and vintage, that unfortunately we're not going to last forever, but we have lots of knowledge to pass on, whether it's knowledge of officiating or protocols, etc., and we need to pass that on. So when introducing a new official or a volunteer who's attending the first time in the group, we need to make them feel welcome. So some of the points that we've put together: make them welcome and don't forget about them. As I've said, if you are being asked to welcome people, I know that when we transitioned from the new education system, and a number of athletes or officials came across from Little A's, I know that a couple of times I was asked to welcome them as an official with Athletics New South Wales. But it's important to continue that contact throughout the day, not just welcome them and say, all right, you're over there, and then forget about it. So introduce them to other members of the team and introduce and include them in any discussions. Again, that's important because I think we've got to develop what I'd call an inclusive environment where they feel part of it, even though they've just arrived. We don't know, as I said, we don't know any of their work or educational backgrounds, and they may have something really positive to contribute. But if we don't give them the opportunity, that they might feel stifled, and it might take them longer than we anticipate to become a member of the team. Share your knowledge regarding the event protocols, very important. Both the track and the field protocols, no matter where they're officiating, the movement protocols, especially around the finishing line, and this will vary from every level of competition, and their role in a team, and involve them in the duties that involve them, in the rotation of duties through the events. That's important. As I said, we used to often hear stories about, oh, well, I'm not coming back anymore because all I did was rake all day or doing some other intensive activity. So it is important that we make them welcome and explain things. Emphasise personal awareness, both in the area of they are working and in their roles. That's really important as well. Ensure they are aware of safety procedures for the event and the field of play. Again, some people are aware, some of the officials will be aware of that those throwing instruments were developed by the Greeks many thousands of years ago to kill people and to kill animals. Well, through athletics, we've developed those to make sure that they become an event, but they can be dangerous. So we need to develop those safety protocols and procedures when they're out there. Answer their questions, provide an opportunity for them to answer questions. And again, this will become through non-verbal communication quite often, because you should be able to read their body language. And if they're ready to ask a question, if it doesn't interrupt your train of thought, what you're saying, let them ask it. But if they're keen, you can just ask them to wait, but make sure you give them the opportunity to ask the questions. And finally, hopefully they've had a good day, and check it with them at the end of the day to make sure you get feedback on their experience, to make sure that, yes, everything went well, or this was a problem, and then you can build on that for next time, because it's what I call open to continuous learning. The first day, we don't know how it's going to work, but if we give the opportunity for the officials and the volunteers to feed the information back, it gives us a better chance of enhancing their experience in the future. So the people we're there for, of course, are the athletes. So that's really important. So what should we look for when dealing with the new athletes? Quite often, new athletes at any level of athletics may be anxious, as I've just said to you. If we took an 8-year-old boy in a 100 metres race, he would just be as anxious and concerned as maybe Sally Pearson was when she won the 2012 100 metres hurdles at London. And of course, she would be far more experienced to hide all that anxiety, because that's a giveaway to her competitors. But we know that they will be anxious. So that it is important that as the first port of call is usually the athlete check-in, although more recently we haven't had a check-in, so we have to really think about people who are new to our sport, to make sure that if there's no check-in, that if somebody comes and asks you a question, that you put their question at ease, put them at ease, to make sure they know where the starting point is. And in this area, officials and excuse me, officials and volunteers are really important. They need to learn quickly. So how a well-organised system to allow athletes to move in and out of the area quickly. Again, a lot of that comes back to safety. Provide a calm and organised approach to disseminating information and their athletic tips, and provide clear instructions without the need for raised voices. The check-in room or the check-in area can be very noisy, and it's all very well for people who know the routine, who are familiar with what's going on, but there'll be people there who do not know that, and we need to treat them with respect and care. So clear information, don't talk too quickly, don't give them too much information, just give them enough information so they know what they have to do without raising the voice, trying to get above the noise of the area that they're in. Okay, what should we look for when dealing with athletes, other officials, volunteers on the field of play? So this is where the nitty-gritty starts. Hopefully they feel relaxed, they feel support, these people feel supported, and they're ready to play their role in competition in assisting athletes. So as experienced officials, we should always, and as I said, this is not a comprehensive list. These are some of the points that we've developed over the years. So there's probably many others that people could come up with, but hopefully we've hit on the main ones. Act respectfully to everyone in the competition area. That is really important, especially for the new officials and for the new athletes. We need to show them respect, watch their behaviour, and if you need to modify their behaviour for whatever reason, a gentle pull aside and talk is better than bawling them out by raising your voice. Act professionally both before, during and after the event. Again, that is important because you are a role model for them. They're going to watch you and see you because you have the experience, you have the uniform, and it'll be fairly clear to them that it's not the first or second time that you've been in this role. So it is important that we act professionally, treat people I keep coming back to this word respect all the time. It is important, but we need to present a positive image of ourselves and of our sport to ensure that they come back. Acting professionally both before, during and after. Again, that can be coupled with risk assessment to just remind people that athletics can be dangerous at times, and we need to make sure that we take every care. We should know what's going on around us. Provide a well-presented competition area that will allow the safer competition and within the rules of competition. And finally give clear instructions as required to ensure everybody can compete to the best of their ability. And again, don't try and overload them with too much instruction. Try and use language or the genre of athletics in very simple terms as opposed to getting into too much detail. And good officiating is inconspicuous officiating. And that's what we're often told, and that's why we wear a uniform that doesn't make us stand out too much amongst the athletes and amongst the crowd and the surrounds. And quite often we only have to intervene when need be. So good officiation is somebody who stands back, let the competition run, and as an official, you do what you have to do to ensure that it runs in a purposeful and an organised manner. Okay, now we look at some various types of communication. As I've said, many of us now are used to things like Facebook and TikTok and some of the others there. But when we're in the field of play in athletics, we need to talk one-to-one or in groups. So it's that verbal and non-verbal communication that are really important as the way we go. So looking at verbal, use a strong, confident speaking voice. There's no need to shout, but when you're talking, you need to be confident in what you say. Try not to speak in a soft voice that doesn't reflect what your role is. A soft voice is okay, especially if you're speaking to one-to-one and you want to get somebody, ask them to come aside and just talk to them. But when you're with a larger group, it's better to speak with a confident voice so everybody realise, yes, this is the person in charge. They know what they're doing. We need to follow what their instructions are. When people are talking, sometimes they can talk too much. And it's important to be a reflective listener. And to me, a reflective listener, if somebody has a problem, I'll let them talk. As I've said, try not to interrupt and summarise both their viewpoints about what they're saying to develop a resolution. So try and not interrupt people when they want to talk if it's a problem-solving situation. Other times, if they're talking and you want to get a message across, well, that's important that you just say, look, can you hold on for a few minutes? I need to get this information across. And then what you can do, you can ask your questions. And again, something that a lot of people sometimes have trouble with, avoid filler words like like, yes, you know, because those words can sometimes take over in a conversation. And it's important that the message is getting across, and those sort of things, no, not using those terms, need to be practiced. Most of us in our jobs, probably in our day-to-day jobs, we do that, and it carries over to athletics in our field of play. So they're the sort of 3 points about verbal communication. With non-verbal communication, in many ways, to me, this is stronger than verbal communication, because there are so many times when somebody says something and their body language says they're not congruent, they're not planning together. So in non-verbal communication, notice how your emotions feel physically. Sometimes inside you feel anxious, you have a tight stomach, and that's fairly normal for your non-communication. But just be aware of that. Be intentional about your non-verbal communication. Positive body language should be the one that that supports the verbal communication. And the third one is mimic non-verbal communication. You may find effective by nodding your head, giving a thumbs up. So it's important that you maintain that level of confidence so the officials and the athletes can come to you knowing that you're the right person to come to help answer their question or maybe to solve a problem. Moving over to written communication now, which is another thing that we need to do. And more and more, or slowly as I should say, that this is becoming more a laptop. Now, I think the day is probably arrived now where certainly in the field events, there's more written communication by electronic means as opposed to handwriting. But with written, when it's required, it's important to strive for simplicity and only say what needs to be said. And for those of us who have been referees and have been certainly to juries, the less said, the better. Get the message across and put it into very simple words. Don't give people so much information that they read things into it that aren't really there. So it's important to make the communication simple. Don't rely on tone. Write as simply and as straightforward as possible. As I said, select the right words. I know that quite often when I'm doing this sort of thing, I might do a quick draft and have a look at it, make sure I've got the message across, take out words I don't need, strengthen some of my arguments, and then just leave it at that. And take time when appropriate to review your written communication before it's presented. And all those things tie in together. So communication is more than just words. These are the crux of what communication is all about. It is not just words. It is why you say it. In other words, what is the intention of your message? If you keep your message brief and to the point and indicates all the factors or all the things that you need to say, that's what you do. You don't need to go any further than that. How you say it, including your tone of voice, that is a priority. That's probably the biggest thing. You can have two people give the same message, but if one understands what the message is and they speak softly, and somebody speaks to somebody in an aggravating tone, I know which one I'd want to listen to. So it's important to say it's not what you say, it's how you say it. When you say it, during your time at the athletics meet, pick the right time. You don't do it in the middle of an event. If you need to speak to somebody, take them aside when it's an appropriate time, not when the event's in play. What you don't say, sometimes that is important. Sometimes what you don't say gives a clearer picture of what you're saying rather than what you are doing. So please, it's important that only sometimes, as I said, this picture is jumbled. So what you need to say it and then finish with it. And finally, your body language, as I've talked about before, non-verbal language, we're talking about their facial expressions, gestures, and postures. So all those things tie in together in what we need to think about when we communicate. Many of you do this, we're fully aware of that. This session is designed to just review those, as we do with our rules every 2 years on a regular basis, and to make sure everybody is the same, because we need to work as a cohesive team when we go onto the field of play, and the verbal and the non-verbal communication are critical, especially when things don't go your way. So let's have a look, remembering your audiences, Barry.
Okay, John, thanks. Yeah, I think it's important that we remember that we're talking to a wide variety of people and their needs are totally different. So you've got other officials, and it's important that we look at who those other officials are, what their experience is, and what their role is. So one week you could be the leader of the group, next week you could be a member of a team. So you've got to look at that, and you've got to think about how will you address a jury member as well. And I think the third point there about athletes, you've got athletes of varying ages, experience and knowledge. And the most important thing is some of the older athletes probably have less experience than some of the younger ones. So you've got to just remember who your audience is. You've got to talk to coaches and managers. And sometimes that could be a bit difficult because the managers may be, especially at a school level, could be just a teacher that's been given that job for the day. And they don't necessarily know the rules. They don't know anything about it. So they're there to try and do the job the best they can. So we need to support them. Parents and extended family are important as well, because they get very uptight at times. So how are you going to deal with those people when their son or daughter has been told that they've been disqualified from an event if they come down to you? The media, how are you going to handle that? Spectators and other members of the general public, because sometimes you'll get a call from outside the field of play telling you something is wrong. Well, you've got to handle that as well. And venue and medical people, you've got to make sure that you get medical people to an area as quickly as you can, and as in the best way that you can, by using clear language to them so that they know exactly where they need to go. And this last one I think is important too, the school conveners. We do a lot of school events, and those school conveners, again, are the same as the managers. Sometimes they've never done an athletics carnival before, and they rely on us to actually run that carnival for them, because they have no idea of the latest rules. They also may have different needs. Some of the school carnivals that I've attended, when I've spoken to the convener, they say, look, can you explain the rules to the children, because we haven't done anything at school about it. Explain the rules. We really, unless it's a very blatant rule infringement, we would rather you talk to them and explain it, because then when they get to district, they know what they're dealing with, rather than telling them that they've been disqualified at a school level, and that would probably stop them from any further athletics activity. So you've got to keep all these people in mind and what their role is as well as your own. But the most important thing is, and this will keep coming back to us all the time, it's about treating people with respect. And you set the standard, not anybody else, when you're in that that role as an official. So your most important thing is to remain calm and remember your role. Okay, so working with other officials and volunteers, you've got to remember that, as we've said before, and we keep coming back to it, that it's a matter of building respect and rapport to develop your team and develop the teamwork of that team. And that revolves around courtesy and understanding and providing a cooperative and caring environment. You've got officials out there who may have years of experience. There are other officials that are just starting out. So you've got to think about that as well when you're working with them, and that's going to help you to promote the sport, because if we've got people there that haven't got a lot of experience, as John was saying before, we don't want to put them on jobs that will drive them away. So we've got to understand, they've got to understand, and you've got to understand or explain to them the hierarchical structure that we exist for safety reasons, and ensure you know where you fit into the arrangement and the roles of each team member. And it's important that if you're given the leadership role, that you lead and you pass on any knowledge or rules and procedures, as well as fulfilling a mentoring role as a component of succession planning. And that's going to be a major one for us as we go through to 2026 and 2032. And prior to entering the event, site leaders need to share their expectations with their team and acknowledge their contribution to the success of the program. So I know with when we have a track team meeting, we will always look at that, and it doesn't matter how experienced people are, because we always have new people there. So we'll talk about procedures, we'll talk about how you enter the field of play, how you exit the field of play, and what's expected. It's, again, just the way you want to be treated. So radio procedures are important. It's really important that you know what the radio protocols are for that meet, and the organisers of the meet, what they expect. So if you're doing a club meet, it'll be totally different to a national meet. We had a situation even yesterday at the trials for the Canberra, for the World Cross Country in Canberra. And we had a lot of problems with the final event, because it was getting very hot, and a lot of the contestants needed, or the competitors needed, medical care. Well, you've got to, as John said before, you've got to be a active listener. And if you're trying to say, athlete 32 is the last one who just has gone past my position, is that as important as I need medical attention at position 5? So you make sure that you listen to seeing what's going on the radio at the time. So another important thing is when you get to your position, that you check that you have radio contact, because if you need it for medical, you've got to be able to get through, and you have to be able to make sure that you get it clearly, your message across, and that the person on the other end can clearly give you indication of when or what's happening with regard to medical assistance, etc. You've got to use appropriate language. You know, we don't want this used for general conversation. It fills up too quickly. I'm going to say with us, with the track, we tend to ask every time for a designated channel just for the umpires, so that we're not cutting across all the radio channels for the competition director, the photo finish, the start, and everything else, so we can discuss what we need to do to report to the referee. So you use your radio only for essential information, and it could be problem at the event site, advising of disqualifications, changes to the start lists, medical assistance for athletes or officials, etc. So you need to think about why you need that radio, and in one way, whether you need to use the radio or whether a signal or that would do the same communication for you. Okay, the way an official communicates with older athletes and coaches is set the tone for the situation. So you use your voice by an official will vary depending on the content. For instance, if you were working prior to the competition and somebody comes up and said, look, I just need to check on this rule, you'd probably take them aside, talk very quietly to them, explain and answer their questions about the rule or whatever they wanted to find out. When you're doing, though, an introduction or a general information, you will have to be have your voice a bit louder, because you have to make sure that everybody hears what you're saying. And it's quite interesting, as quite a few of the field event people will tell you, that when we have the long jump at SOPAC, right beside the grandstand, people are wondering or wanting to know what you're saying. And so it's important that you clearly tell everybody, coaches in the coaching area, spectators and athletes, what is going to happen and how the event will be run. And then you would deal with it slightly differently in certain situations about explaining a breach of the rules or laws to participants or team managers during a competition. And again, as John said before, if you're relating an account of an incident to a jury during or after the competition, they don't want a long saga about what happened. They want immediately, this is what happened, this is the rule that was broken. They don't need all the other stuff. They will ask the questions if they want information. Thanks, Dan. Okay, communication with older athletes and coaches in these situations. How you convey your message is important. Participants and coaches are looking for officials who communicate confidently and in a decisive manner. And that, what we've said before, is clear voice, appropriately chosen words, firm manner, that you are professional. You're looking at the person. It's no point in talking about something and looking away or not getting eye contact. And you have sufficient strength in your voice to convey the message so participants are able to hear the decision, and that you're an active listener. So the ability to receive, attend to, interpret, and respond to verbal messages and cues like body language in ways that are appropriate to the purpose. Okay, so what communication can also be non-verbal, and we use that a lot, like flags to indicate a fair or foul trial in field events. Use a board at field event sites to let spectators and coaches know the height or the result of an attempt. You've got track umpires using a folder to signal whether there was an infringement of the rules, and you've got cards at the start that we know about, and of course the yellow and red cards to indicate unsporting behaviour. All right, so communication with young adults, young athletes, I think we've dealt with most of those, but it's just good to have that to go through to say, well, yes, you've got to use a clear voice, you've got to limit the information, so only tell them what they need to know rather than go on with a long history or saga, and use understandable language. Don't use highfalutin terms. Adjust your volume and pace and pitch to the situation. Use positive language, be specific, use demonstration and use walkthroughs if you need to do that, so that you can explain to people before an event starts what is expected of them. Okay, and para-athletes, this is another one that's important. When communicating, you've got to consider the situation, what information you wish to impart. These are athletes and treat them as such. Speak to them, not others. we find a lot of people, officials, will tend to speak to if you're talking to a para athlete after the event, they'll tend to talk to the coach or the parent and leave the athlete out of it. What I'm saying there is that you've got to make sure that the athlete is in the conversation because it affects them. So how do you do that? Well, when you're talking to wheelchair or frame running competitors who are in a wheelchair, you don't stand over the athlete when conversing with them. You get down to their level so they can easily make eye contact. So you say, oh, look, excuse me, I'll just get a seat and we'll sit down and talk about this. And you'll notice there's a difference in the attitude of the athlete, that you've given them that thought so that you're down at their level and you're talking to them eye to eye. And you beware of the disability. For instance, you can do this by looking at the start sheet and knowing what the disability is, and for instance, if you've got a deaf athlete and they haven't received their hearing aid, you may have to wait until that hearing aid or that cochlear implant comes so they can hear what you're saying. So they're the important things, and depending on the situation, you may need to get somebody in there who is a supporter so that they're clear on what is being said so there's no misunderstanding, because you don't want that athlete going up and saying, oh, the official said this, the official said that, and that's not what you've said. And again, consider your use of language with whoever you've got out with you that you're talking to. Limit the information being given to what you really need to say, and listen to attentively to those involved in the conversation. So you've got to make sure that you give the athlete the chance to talk if they want to, or if you're using a support person, that they get their chance to have their opinions taken into account.
Okay, before I start this, I've noticed on one of the comments on the chat was about the noise that's generated at SOPAC with music and all other things. But I think if you really want to be tested, volunteer to go to a GPS carnival, because as well as noise, you've got drums, bagpipes and the lot. So it is really challenging. I know the first time I went there, I thought, I'm not going to come back to this again. But over time, you learn to focus. I'm saying on a minor extent, as for a starter, if a plane, we're talking about SOPAC, if a plane goes over, usually the starters will get the athletes to stand up until the plane goes. But that external noise is something that we really have to deal with. And it really is important to really focus as to how you talk to people, especially with, as Barry's indicated, with para athletes. They'll be the ones who will be more offset or set off, whichever way you want to put it, with all that external noise. So it is important that you gain the eye contact with whoever you're talking about when you're dealing with situations where there's a lot of what we might call external interference or external noise. But quite often, of course, we have to deal with conflict situations. As we all know, we can talk using the appropriate cues that we've already spoken about. But unfortunately, when things don't go all of our way and there's conflict, which whether it comes from an athlete, whether it comes from a coach, or whether it comes from a fellow official, it's important that we have a strategy in how to dealing with this, because conflict, unfortunately, is a part of our life. It's just not confined to athletics. It's there in all of our day-to-day interaction with people. And again, we're getting back to people all the time in what we're talking about here today. So conflict can occur between fellow officials, athletes, coaches, managers, and other athletic people. And if you're in a leadership role, it can take the form of a protest. So when you get a protest, this is when you really need to be on the ball, so you can manage that the way you want it to manage. When there's a protest, you conduct the protest and you do it the way you want to do it. You don't let the person making the protest take over. So in this situation, follow a strategy that works for you. And we've identified a few here, but obviously it won't work the same for every single person. So If you, over time, you'll develop a strategy and methods and protocols for dealing with conflict resolutions. But if you're new to this aspect of athletics, here's a couple of points that you might like to refer to. And again, these aren't new to what we've said previously in the last few minutes. So let the person explain their concern without interruption. Usually as the track referee, when somebody comes up to me, especially they're hot under the collar, I just say, all right, what do you want to tell me? I don't say, well, I disqualified your athlete because of this rule. I read the body language and I say, what do you want to tell me? And I don't say anything. In other words, I'm a reflective listener, so I'm taking it all in. Once I know they're finished, that's when I seek further information through questioning to clarify what the concern really is. And that's important that sometimes some of the coaches and athletes just want to have a say. So let them have their say. Okay, thank you. I've listened to you, but this is the decision I make. If you want to take it further, there is an avenue to go to the jury to dispute my decision, but that's the decision I've made. Use I statements rather than you. So for an example, I feel that the report that I received is what occurred. Not, you're not listening to me. I statements reflect your emotions, your opinions, your personal values and morals, rather than matters that you don't like about the other person speaking. So whilst they might not be your best friend at that athletic meet, you've got to make sure that they're treated with respect and fairness and given an opportunity, because if they don't, that's when they can make it harder for you. The last thing you want to do is get to a situation when you need to put your hand in a pocket and pull out a yellow card. That's where you've probably lost control of the situation. So it is important you take it calmly. Quite often when I'm dealing with athletics or coaches, if I've got an assistant referee or somebody who can take my role, I pull them aside quite often off the field of play to make sure I give them the opportunity to hear what they say, especially if they're fired up. They're the ones you need to delay them talking as much as possible. So by delaying that, you're giving them a chance to cool down, and then you say to them, okay, tell me what the problem is. So they're just a few pointers. As I said, other people will tell you other things. Try and work from experience, talking to other people. Use what works for you.
One of the other things, John, too, is that if you take them away, they lose their audience and they can be quietened down much easier than being out in the open where they can put on a good performance.
Yes, sometimes they want to be seen to be heard. And that's the point that Barry's made. And people can see, especially those people who are in the audience or the spectators, they can see that, oh, well, at least the referee or the person who they're talking to is prepared to listen to what's being said. But taking them away takes the audience away. Okay, so how do we deal with these situations apart from the strategies I've already outlined? Maintain a calm voice or persona. Remain level-headed in order to think rationally about the situation that appeases both you and the other person. Sometimes it's relevant to say, after you've given your information and the person, the coach or the athlete wants to have given theirs, quite often it's not unusual for me to say, well, what do you want to see happen? Because it's important. You're dealing with them. They're the athlete. They're the most important people at the meet from the point of view of athletics. So it's a good idea sometimes to say, okay, what do you want to see happen? And then you can work and negotiate as to maybe to not give them their own way. That's the last thing we want to do, because we work because we have our protocols and we have rules, but to try and placate them somewhat as to, okay, well, this is what we need to do. Pay attention to the non-verbal cues. As I've often said, I think those things are stronger than what's being said, because I've come across people in my line of work as being teachers, being Barry and I and teachers, and many of you others, that quite often people can say something, but their body language does not correspond to it. So it is important that the body language tells you when someone says one thing, but they mean the other thing. So Again, that comes with experience, but don't get flustered with it. Take your time, take a couple of deep breaths. Even if you've got a bottle of drink with you, just take a quiet drink, and then you can move on. But it's important that you let them talk, and then you fulfill your role. So don't take everything personally. I know that when I've been to jury, sometimes I win, sometimes I lose. It depends on the makeup of the jury. But you go out there, every time you go to officiate, you go out there to do your best. And I know that I've now developed a habit from my point of view. I've been experiencing for a long, long time. But what I tend to try to think about every time I go out, whether it was last Saturday at Illawarra Classic or yesterday at the World Championships for selection of the team for Butcher, I try to think, this is my first time I've been out here. This is the first time the athletes have been out here. I need to make a good fist of this. I need to do my role properly. So remember, you're at the meet to fulfill a role. Just do your job. Don't take it personally. Remember the importance of the relationship between you and the other person. You don't know when in the future you'll come across these people. So treat them with respect. It is important that you give the information that's required using a calm voice, using whatever strategies and techniques that you think is going to get the message across. Really important, because you don't want them to come up next week. Oh, listen, last week you said this to me or that to me. I know I'm not going to get anywhere with you today. Well, that's the last thing we want to happen. We need to provide people with a logical answer and let them go away and think about it. And then next time they confront you, sometimes you're surprised. Say, because I've had people say, thanks for what you said last week. I went home and thought about that, and you were right, or you were partly right, or I agree with you in your role, but I don't necessarily agree with other things. So finally, explain clearly what you intend to do and nominate a time when you meet again to resolve the situation. Now, this one is especially if you're dealing with a fellow official. If you need to speak to a fellow official from a reprimand point of view, or from a viewpoint that you disagree with, the field of play is not the time to do it. You need to say, look, we need to put that aside. We'll park that issue. When we've finished at the end of the day, let's sit down and have a talk about it. But at this stage, that's the way it is. And we need to continue this event. We don't need to make an exhibition of ourselves, for the want of a better word, in front of other officials or spectators. We just need to do it quietly. So can we meet after the event, and then we'll sit down over a drink or a cup of tea or whatever, and just let's talk about what happened, and let's see if we can resolve it. So for you, it doesn't happen again. There's no repeat of it. So tips for resolving conflict. This one about be professional, I started off talking about that right in the beginning of the first slide. We need to be professional. We know what our professional role is at athletics. We've been around long enough, most of us, and Barry and I have tried to encompass lots of those factors in this presentation. So speak clearly and stay composed in heated situations. That's really important. We need to demonstrate confidence in managing the situation. As I've indicated, the last thing you need to do is lose control of the situation, because that's what you do not want. Avoid arguments or debates, and don't try to make up different rulings that are out of the blue. Really important that you stick to what your strategy is. You know the rules. You make sure you argue or you discuss any conflict within the rules, so people know where you're coming from. Remain calm. Don't overreact. I said in the previous slide, don't take things personally. I know it's hard. I know when I first started refereeing and being an official, I took it personally. I thought, oh, gee, I don't know whether I'm doing the right thing. Should I come back next week? But I learned over time, because I was in a supportive environment. People like Ian White were really good mentors to me. And if they saw, and Alan Urane, there are a number of them who saw me as a junior official, and they sat me down and spoke to me and said, don't overreact. Just stay relaxed and adopt a low-key position, body language, and use objective, neutral language. So those people can help you. You can learn from them. And if you're unsure about things, about dealing with conflict, it's a good idea to have a dress rehearsal, for the want of a better word, for the time it comes, and work with somebody who may be your mentor, somebody you work with in your team, and just go through a few ideas and get them to give you some feedback after you've done this. Address the problem, not the emotions. The emotions are the really hard things to control for the person who is the aggressor during the conflict. And when I mean the aggressor, the person who has the problem, and they come to you, or you're the one who has to deal with it. So try to put aside the emotions of all the participants, dealing with the facts and the available evidence. The official is more likely to be treated in a fair and appropriate, you're likely to come to a fair and appropriate decision. So emotions can overtake you very easily. Stay calm, stay controlled, stay in control. Focus on the person. People are not objects, so they don't need to be treated like one. Acknowledge a participant with eye contact, and Barry's focused about that, and I can't highlight that more so than what Barry said. It's the eye contact that counts, and use names if possible. The first thing I do when I'm dealing with a coach or an athlete, the first thing I do, as I've said, is I introduce myself. I said, my name's John, I'm the track referee today, and then I start the conversation. And if they, I read their body language, and if I need to stop and say, all right, what do you want to tell me? Or I can say, look, just let me finish this, and then you can turn it. Again, it comes with practice. It's what you read into this situation. So people are not objects. Acknowledge the contact and recognise if they've got something to say. Just don't dismiss them. It's the worst thing we can do is let them not talk, and then they go away, and then they say that person doesn't listen to me. Okay, this must be my right. Tips for resolving conflict. Again, there are all these underlying emotions and underlying words and strategies that you can use. Be fair. Avoid team or individual bias at all costs. In other words, what we do is we interpret the rule for the 8-year-old child the same way as we would interpret the rule for, say, Sally Pearson, because I mentioned that a little scenario before. It's important that we're consistent in what we do. Demonstrate integrity, because this is one of the greatest assets of an official. Use that integrity to your benefit. Be confident and open. Don't be defensive or try to justify actions. Clarify decisions as appropriate based on the facts and the evidence presented. If the person you're dealing with with an athlete or a coach in an official situation, if they're not happy, all right, they can go to the jury, but you've got to do your best to explain to them what the situation is. And quite often when I talk to athletes and managers and they want to go to the jury, I said, well, I often say, well, you'll need to come up with more evidence than you're presenting with me now for them to make a different decision, because they won't change their mind if you're not going to bring up any information, because all my paperwork I will hand to the jury after this conversation. And be firm. Deal with unacceptable behaviour firmly and quickly. Just put your hand up. Stop. You'll get time to talk. As I said, set the boundaries in a professional, assertive manner. So at the beginning of the conflict, sit people down, or when you sit talking with them, outline the boundaries of what you're going to do. If they're happy with it, go ahead. If they want to take you to task, or well, what is it I've said that you don't like? Okay, deal with that, and then get on with resolving the conflict. And remember that 90% of conflicts occur not because of what is said, but it's the tone of voice and how you say it. That is extremely important, and that's my biggest takeaway message to you. It's how you say it. Thanks, Barry.
All right, John. So we're just going to review some of those things, because I think it's important when we're looking at it. For instance, everyone has a different way of using language, and therefore what I say to an athlete is going to be totally different to the way John would say the same, give the same message. So I think it's important that you get used to the idea of what are you going to say when you have to say disqualify a competitor. How are you going to say it? You don't want something that is going to go on and on and on and on. You want to be succinct and concise in what you say. So practice it. You know, when the starters make a decision of you've made a false start, you are now disqualified from this event, or you have disqualified yourself from this event, they have protocol language that they use. So it's a good idea for you to have a pattern of language that you're happy to use when you're talking to various people. As I've said before, you've got to maintain good eye contact. You demonstrate a varied vocabulary and tailor your language to your audience. As I said, you don't talk to a school child of 8, 9, 10 the same way as you would talk to a masters athlete or a open athlete. So you've got to think about that. As we've said all the way, listen effectively and reflectively, and make sure you present your viewpoints and information appropriately. As John said, you don't go and get het up and take it personally, but you make sure that it's quite clear what you are there for and your role, and what information you want to get across is done properly and in an appropriate manner. And write clearly and concisely. Now, we spoke about written communication before, so where are we using that? Well, one of the things that's come into our area in the last few years is to write a feedback on things like the level 2 and level 3 practical cards. You don't want to go into chapter and verse. Just write it concisely, tell them what was good, what was bad, in as few words possible. Also, if you are writing out a verbal protest form, which is for the field, or in some cases the track referee have to do it as well, just tell them what is needed. And when we do our infringement form, we can tell everybody what's needed with just circling the rule that's affected and filling out the information on that form. We don't have to go and write reams of comments about what happened. If people want that information, like a jury or the track referee or the field referee, they can come and ask you. So it's important that that's done in a clear and concise manner. And you work well within your group, demonstrating leadership as required. So, as I said before, you can be a leader one week and a member of a team the next week, and therefore you work in that capacity and do it to the best of your ability and make sure you're prepared to do the job properly. And you diffuse conflict situations with authority, demonstrating empathy and compassion. And that goes for officials as well. Make sure that when you're dealing with other officials, you're doing it with empathy and compassion, and don't let the situation, especially as John was saying, if you need to reprimand an official or talk to an official about the way they've behaved or they've spoken to somebody, I think you've got to get them, as John said, take them away and quietly just have a chat about it. But the most important thing is there are documents now that are on both the ANSW and the Athletics Australia website, and they deal with the code of conduct, and all Australian athletics officials are using the same code of conduct and the same members protection policy, which is on the Australian Athletics website. And if you want to know what is expected of an official, you go to Article 6 in that document of the Code of Conduct. And there's the ways to get to that. With New South Wales Athletics, you go to About, which is up on the top right-hand corner. Click on that and you go to Info Hub and then Sports Integrity, and you'll find those policies. And with the Australian Athletics website, it's Info Hub in the first instance, and then Sports Integrity. But the other thing you've got to be aware of is also there are a number of protocol documents on the Australian Athletics website, which detail the areas of competition and also contain information regarding how communication should be handled. So that's another area that you can look at if you want to make sure that you're up to date with the latest protocols. And this was just something that we put together or Mary found, and I think it's probably a good idea. I'm not going to read it all to you, but just some of the things you can always think about when you're in a conflict situation. You've got to be positive. You've got to try and diffuse the situation through your positivity and your actions. So you think before you speak. You always keep an open mind about what's going on. As John said, you don't think, oh, that's from that club. I don't like that club, or I don't like that coach, or whatever it is. You've got to make sure that you discuss rather than argue. You think positive thoughts. So, you know, don't this guy's getting up my goat, I'm going to put him in his place or whatever. Always say kind words. Be objective about criticism. Respect the feelings of others. Don't stress other people's faults. You can't change their actions. Engage in physical activity every day. So that's for your mental health. But I think the biggest one is the 10th one. Don't ever dwell on the negative news. So you can be, as John and we've said right through this, that it is important that you know what you are doing and that you don't let the negatives of somebody having a raised voice towards you, or that you've had to disqualify somebody and a young child or whatever. You have to do what as an official you are there for, your role. And that's the most important thing. And if you've done it, then you have to live with that decision. But the most important thing is we all make mistakes. So it is important that we learn from those mistakes so that we don't make them again, but don't dwell on it. Oh, gee, I've made a mistake, and start beating yourself up with it. Okay, so thank you for your attendance tonight. I hope that's helped. We hope that that's helped out with some of the things that we've come up against lately. And thanks for all the parts in the chat box too. The interesting comments.
Yeah, thank you, John and Barry, for your interesting and worthwhile presentation this evening. And thanks for the time you put into the session this evening and all the planning that you did. And now for those people who are watching the replay, I am going to finish the recording in a moment. Those people who are here live, you can stay on just for a moment. I'm going to deal with one question that came up in the chat box. But everybody, I'm just going to stop the recording right now. Stay on if you are here live.